pengetahuan, dan mudah-mudahan Bapak Ibu juga bisa menyerap pengetahuan dari beliau. Dan tentunya akan disampaikan dalam bahasa Inggris, dan saya yakin Bapak Ibu juga akan bisa memahaminya, dan mudah-mudahan akan ada interaksi yang baik di antara Bapak Ibu dengan Prof. Hanim. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending these lectures, and then I let Prof. Hanim to start her lectures today. Prof. Hanim, silakan, Prof.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Maskun. Thank you again to Unhas Faculty of Law for inviting me to speak on legal research methodology today. I know many of you are students either pursuing your master's degree and also your PhD degree. PhD, am I right, Dr. Maskun? Yes. So I hope that this will give you some kind
exactly.
of, yeah, right. So I hope that this, hopefully it's a short lecture, but I have 56 or more than 50 slides to go through with all of you. And I hope you can just follow, yeah, because I feel that legal research methodology, especially in our parts of the world, is particularly rather, it's emerging, it's an emerging concept. I think this one was actually conducted, I think, at least in Malaysia, for legal research, at least in the late 1990s. So during my time, you know, I did not have any knowledge on how to conduct research because it was like 30 years ago. So we were left on our own, you know, we were asked to do things by ourselves, and we need to conduct, you know, I remembered I was potong newspapers, yeah, newspapers clipping, just to get some information on the law that I was researching on. But anyway, I shall just begin. So thank you again to Dr. Maskun. And thank you to all the students in advance, yeah, for sitting down and hoping to listen to me quite intently. So I shall just share my screen on the presentation which I wish to present to you. Can everybody see my slide? Yes? Boleh? Boleh ya? Bapak-bapak, ibu-ibu boleh ya? Can you see it? Boleh ya? Okay, right. So basically, I'm looking. Thank you. So,
yes.
Thank you. So I'm really looking at the basic concepts in legal research methodology. Like I said earlier, you know, during my time, I think there wasn't any kind of formal teaching on what is a research legal methodology. There was none. Yeah. So we were basically asked to conduct whatever kind of research, you know, during that time, whatever that we know, in order to conduct our study in a systematic, hopefully, and also to finally get the objectives or the outcome for a research study. So basically, you need to understand, because most of you are already doing your dissertations and thesis, either for LLM or PhD. So you would already know what is to be expected of you and what is research really, and more importantly, what is legal research, because that is the component that you need to look into. So what is research? So this is a general way of looking at it. It's a scientific search for knowledge. Yeah, it's really a method. It's a search for pertinent information, or kind of getting new information from old information, and also is an art for scientific investigation. So basically, you're trying to look at a new issue from something that you don't know to something that hopefully that you will find at the end of the tunnel, that you know something about this particular research that you're looking at. So basically, it's a search for knowledge. It's a search for, you know, information. And how do you go through it? You have to investigate, and this is where it takes a lot of our time to investigate. Yeah. So what is research methodology? Let's not go through what is legal research methodology just yet. Look at it from a general point of view. And I think, again, that most of you would already, I don't know what stages you're at, yeah, but obviously you would have already touched on how to construct your statement of problem by, you know, reading from a lot of materials, particularly in your legal aspect that you're researching on. So you would have to know from your statement of problem that you've already defined, you've already identified, you would have to figure out now how to go about doing this research. How do you fulfill this problem by getting some kind of a solution to close, or rather to find to end the problem that you're looking at. So you will need to know what type of research that you need to conduct, what are the collection of data that you need to undertake, the analysis of the data collection that you have undertaken, and probably during that time you need to do sampling and sample. Now, when you talk about research methodology, it's more towards social sciences. This was when it was evolved throughout so many years, and after which the legal arena had actually adopted this research methodology, right? But the basic of the research methodology that we see now is really looking at a certain problem and how to overcome those problems by coming up with some kind of a solution in order to resolve the issue that you're dealing with. Again, so what is research methodology? So it is a way of doing something, yeah? And it could be in a form of a standard, a process, or a way of doing research. And in order to do that, there'll be some kind of investigation, some kind of a scientific approach in order for you to gain new knowledge to resolve the problem that you have come up with. So you need to do it rather systematically. If not, your research will be all over the place. And at the end of the day, you will not get the outcome that you wish to get for that particular problem that you're looking at. So it's very, very important that you know that there must be some kind of a process, organization from A to Z. Kalau tidak ada organization, processes from A to Z, how you organize your research methodology, your processes, at the end of the day, you may not get the objective. You will not get the solution that you wish to get to fulfill that or to resolve that research problem. So it's very important for you to do this. Now, steps in research processes. Now, when it comes to these processes, it depends on the individual. This is only a general guideline that I wish to give you, but many of you may look at things more differently where, for example, you may somehow, at the end of the day, you might just come up with some kind of conclusion first after reading so many materials, right? And then you might just pop back to selection of research problem in order to see whether or not it gels. But at the end of the day, these are the guidelines or basically the processes that you need to look into. The first one is selection of research problem. Now you have to read around your problem before you can come up with a research problem. And you need to read a lot of materials on this, yeah? In order for you to find that what is the problem in this legal area? What is the issue that we need to resolve, we need to work at in order to make sure that the law actually is enforced effectively, for example. Then only you come up with formulation of hypothesis. What is your hypothesis? Then you carry on with your actual attack on the problem by looking at laws, legislations, looking at your government regulation, presidential regulation, your constitution, yeah? Your adat law, for example, your customary adat law, Islamic law, and then you move on to collection of data. How do you collect all these data? Sometimes you need to do some survey or interviews in order to get some, materials on how do people perceive this kind of problems. After which, once you've already collected the data, you have to analyze the data to see whether or not the problem is actually a problem. And how do you solve it? Because normally in interviews and surveys, you'll be able to find during the analysis of it, you will need to interpret certain feedbacks, comments. And from there, you can come up with, or you can build some kind of interpretation, and you will process the data in accordance with your problem statement. And then finally, you have to come up with some kind of a solution to this. What is your conclusion to this problem? Yeah. And after which, at the end of the day, you would have to write a research report or position paper on the topic that you've chosen, the problem that you've chosen. So basically at the end of the day, ada masalahnya, kemudiannya how do you overcome masalah tersebut, problem tersebut. That's the key to this legal research, yeah? Now, so what it means really is legal research, this legal research methodology may be applicable for interpretation or analysis of codes, acts, rules, or to compare laws of different countries. Kebanyakannya, we always do comparative study between Indonesia and Malaysia when it comes to environmental law, because my area is in environmental law. So you will need to compare sometimes, yeah, laws or legislations between two countries or more. Or to compare more than two municipal laws of the nation. For example, if you have regional or provincial regulation, you will need to compare between these two laws. Which one works better? Which one has more effect or consequences when you implement the law? Which one? You need to compare sometimes. And at the end of the day, which is most important, is compliance. Society mengikut undang-undang ke tidak? Yeah. What is the effect on that law on the society? So that's very important. So this is basically an application of the methods. And how do you do it? By looking at all these different points and factors. Okay, when you have come up with your problem statement, you have read materials or you're still reading it, and I'm sure that you're taking a lot of sources from basically two sources when you talk about legal research methodology. The first one is from sources of law, meaning primary authority of law. When you look at in Indonesia, probably you're looking at reading materials or documents in terms of statutes, regulations, and codes. And I know in Indonesia that you don't take judicial decisions as your primary authority of law. Am I right, Dr. Maskun? Di Indonesia, decision di mahkamah tidak diikuti ya, betul ya? Can anyone enlighten me on this? Encik Muhammad Safri, betul ke? Di Indonesia, judicial decisions is not taken into account. Am I right, Dr. Maskun?
Pardon?
In Indonesia, judicial decisions is not taken into account?
No.
No, you don't?
It is a part of the source, legal sources actually.
Oh, it is part, yeah, but you don't take it into, okay, so they are not a source of law apparently in Indonesia. Am I right or am I wrong? Because I'm getting different, or do you take that into account when you talk about primary, when you talk about...
when we talk about primary, yes.
Yes, okay, so you don't take that into account. You take, like, for example, Indonesian constitution, you take into your regulations, presidential decree and all that, yeah?
Yes.
Right. So when it comes to secondary, thank you, Dr. Maskun. So when it comes to secondary authority of law, then you'll be looking at reports, journals, and legal treaties between Indonesia and other countries, encyclopedias and dictionaries. And of course, the other part of the documents that you need to look at will be the non-legal sources. Non-legal sources is basically trying to support the information. As example would be lifestyle of people, memories, experiences, and how do you derive them? You actually get them from your questionnaires and surveys. Yeah. Now, next part is in regards to legal methods, and the main methods which normally us legal research scholars try to follow are, the first one is you're actually doing a study on the system of values. Yeah, for example, if a researcher is conducting a research on Environmental Protection and Management Act 2009 Indonesia, you would need to know the background or brief literature on the sustainable environment in Indonesia in order to understand the objective of Environmental Protection and Management Act 2009, or else you won't be able to comprehend how did this come about. Then you wouldn't even know how can this be complied or enforced by the government. So you need to understand those system of values behind any kind of a law which is being implemented. Second one, you'll be actually studying the practice of law. How do you apply the laws in society? So that is one of the methods, or rather the study of the practice of law when you do this research. The next method is you're actually studying the normative character, to study the legal discourse on certain enactments or statutes or presidential decree in Indonesia, for example, for, let's say, for example, rule of compliance. How do you comply with such rules in Indonesia? Is it effective? Is it not effective? Is there any non-compliance? So you are actually studying the normative character of that particular legislation. Next would be, if at all, you'll be studying the procedural validity, because in every legislation that you have in Indonesia, there'll be certain procedures that you need to undertake in order to give effect to that act. And this is also equally important. For example, the study of procedure of declaration of emergency. So how do you go about it? What are the processes? What are the procedures? What are the methods in order to effect that legislation? Next, you would have to compare, or rather study, the international and municipal law between, for example, Indonesian law with international treaties in relation to climate change convention, for example. How do you relate the two? Yeah, you will need to understand that as well. And that's why we have this study on international and municipal law. Next one, which is very important, is the legal impact analysis. Now, legal impact analysis is basically where it tells you that this particular legislation, once it is being implemented, once it is being effected, it has some kind of a legal impact, meaning it works. Okay, so you're actually studying a piece of law in action or enforcement. So this is to see the effectiveness of the law once the law it is being implemented. So this is utterly important when it comes to your research study. What is the legal impact of that particular law, for example? Next is really, you're talking about utility of legal research. Basically, you're asking yourself, what's the purpose of this legal research? Yeah, what's the purpose of this? There must be some purpose, or else there's no point in taking a legal research. So basically, you know, you're also studying in a way, when you're doing your legal research, that you need to have some kind of a complete knowledge, information on how you govern society. So you need to have that social control via gaining or via having a particular type of knowledge. So that's important as well. Yeah. Also, social welfare can also be achieved through social legal research. Now, this is also important because legal research helps us to judge the social evils and thus to take necessary steps to remove them. So for the benefit of the society, we need to get or to achieve some kind of information, for example, to overcome cases in murder cases, for example. How do we overcome them for the benefit of the social well-being of the society at large? Thirdly, is the purpose of doing a legal research is also for law reforms. Because without doing legal research, you wouldn't even know whether or not the previous law is effective or otherwise. And therefore, if it's ineffective, you would need some kind of a reform, a law reform. And that's very important. And most of the time, governmental agency would actually suggest reforms in law by looking at previous experiences in other legislations that may look as though it is, you know, it doesn't have that full effectiveness of enforcement of those laws. So law reforms are especially important. Next one is to basically to know the law. I think this one does not only apply to legal researchers, students such as yourselves, but I think it also applies to the public at large. Yeah, and obviously, you know, at our position, we are able to analyze and know the research more than the rest of society, because we have access to various reading materials on the law. And this is particularly important, especially when you're advocating research about what are the laws on a particular case. Yeah. Next, the utility of legal research also applies to when you wish to study on the evolvement of law. How does it begin? When does it begin? What was the problem that triggered this particular law to be implemented and enforced? When was it? So you would know the history of the law itself when you talk about legal research. And I'm sure that many of you have gone through this, studying the evolution of the law from beginning till now. Next one is comparative law, because this is utterly important as well, because you'll be looking at different experiences from different countries. For example, Indonesia and Malaysia, Dr. Maskun and I, we actually have a research project to working on the plastic pollution in Indonesia and Malaysia. So we are actually comparing our laws, whether or not we have any laws in Malaysia or Indonesia when it comes to preventing plastic pollution. If we don't have any, right, what are the law reforms that we can suggest to the government? If we do have any, whether or not we can make improvements in the law. So we can compare our two countries, and also with other countries that have better laws in preventing plastic pollution, for example. And the working of the law is obviously it's important, yeah, where research is used to know how far the enacted law is implemented. How far is it implemented in the society? Is it working? Is it working at all? So those are the reasons. And finally, you'll be looking through judgments as well. In Malaysia, at the very least, we are part of the Commonwealth countries. We look at judgment by the judges very carefully and very seriously in order to come up with some kind of a conclusion to our legal research. So that becomes a backbone also to overcome problems in certain problems in Malaysia. We look at judicial decisions. So those are the purposes of the why we need to conduct legal research. Why? Yeah. Now, as we move on, there are two types of research. One is a documentary research, and the other one is field research. Back in the days in the 1970s and 60s and 80s, yeah, normally when you talk about legal research, we only talk about documentary research. We never undertake any kind of field research that deals a lot with surveys and questionnaires. We don't. But nowadays, we see a lot of the merging of these two types of research, the documentary and field research. There is a merge, yeah, where we do documentary research, which really it comes up to desktop research and also library research, and also field research, where we actually go out and find information from people when it comes to a certain aspect of the law. So you'll see a lot more of this merging of this documentary research and field research. So what is documentary research? When you talk about documentary research, we talk about doctrinal legal research. We talk about review of documentary materials that you can find at the libraries in textbooks, in statutes, precedents. When it comes to Malaysia, we talk about precedents in judicial decisions, and also publications that you can find. So basically, it is all about text. Yeah, it's all about reading materials. That means you sit in front of your desk, your desktop, your PC, whatever materials nowadays you can get online, that is considered as documentary research. That means you're not going out there, right? Taking statements from officials, public officials, or government officials for that particular area that you're looking at. We are only looking and reading materials that is before you, reading materials. So the reading materials could be, like I said, It ranges from textbooks, articles, reports from governments, or even private institutions, precedent judicial decisions, or any other materials that is linked to the study that you're undertaking. Now, field research is completely different. This is actually a mergence of everything. You talk about looking at reading materials. You're talking about qualitative or quantitative surveys or methods. You're talking about statistical method of research. And you're also talking about empirical method of research. Now, this can be said to be in one big ball where everything is embedded within it. So field research is rather, how do you say, it's an extended version of the doctrinal research. That means you go beyond reading materials. You just go beyond reading materials to do your research and to get that information. So when you talk about research categories, these are the ones that you'll be looking at. Educational research can be categorized into fundamental research, applied research, action research, where basically at some point or another, you'll be undergoing either one or two, or it's a mix of the three, and also doctrinal or traditional or non-empirical legal research. Now, basically, when you talk about doctrinal, you're talking about legal propositions. You're only looking at the law. You're not looking at anything else. You're not looking at statements from other people. You're not looking at the conclusion that is derived from surveys or questionnaires that you've given to a certain part of the society on that particular subject. No, you're only looking at the substantive areas of law, such as in Indonesia, constitutional law. You're looking at criminal law. You're looking at the nature of rights, duty, liability, justice, etc. So when you talk about doctrinal or traditional, you're talking about pure research, pure legal research. You're looking only at the theories of law. So doctrinal research, like I said just now, doctrinal research basically talks about the law itself and how do you carry out the research when it comes to doctrinal research. You would have to compile a lot of reading materials. And this, you would have to go to the library, you get it online. Nowadays, you can get it online. You can get it from, many of the Elsevier and websites and so forth. There's so many sources that you can get all these materials when it comes to doctrinal research. And then once you have read all the materials, you have to, again, come up with a problem. And then you go through the motion and you formulate a conclusion based on what you have analyzed or assessed when you have read all the materials that you have collected. Then at the end of the day, you write up your study results. So basically, the beginning, the content, and at the end of it all, there must be some kind of a solution. Sources of doctrinal research, like I mentioned just now, again, you have to look at the reading materials. You're looking through conventional, customary legal sources, primary sources that we were talking about. You're looking at textbooks, references. You're talking about case books. You're talking about your own constitution. You're talking about case laws. You're talking about statutes, enactments, reports of committee, legal history, and judgment. So you're looking at all of these sources in order to come up with some kind of a problem statement. And finally, at the end of it all, hopefully you can find some kind of a solutions to those problems. Characteristics of doctrinal research. Now, the study is mainly based on legal propositions. The reason for the decision which is legally binding and creates precedent in your country. The sources of data for doctrinal researchers are the reports of appellate courts. And I think in this case, it may not apply in Indonesia, and conventional legal theory. It is concerned with what the popular doctrine of law says and not as what made the authority to say so or what has been the impact of that say. So you have to look at the doctrine of law. So in Malaysia, we have, when it comes to judicial precedents, we talk more on stare decisis, this doctrine of law called stare decisis. We talk about, I think in Indonesia, you have this, I must say that doctrine of law and principles of law are completely two different things, yeah? Now, doctrine of law is, for example, you know, things that have been, I don't know, in Indonesia, Mas Kun, whether you have this doctrine of law called ratio decidandi. I'm not so sure in Indonesia, where it's evolved throughout the years, and it's basically based on a Latin interpretation of the law. Yeah. So basically, it is not what the authorities say. It is actually been evolved throughout the evolvement of the law, so to speak. Yeah. I'm not sure in Indonesia it is as such. When you talk about doctrine of law in Indonesia, do you have that? I'm sure you have that doctrine of law. Principles of
Yes, we
law.
have.
Yeah, principles of law, for example, in principles in environmental protection and management. Yeah, in Indonesia, I think you talk about state responsibility. You talk about polluter pay principle. You talk about participation, public participation. You talk about justice. You talk about integration. Yeah, but when it comes to doctrine of law, it's much more. Yeah, it's how do you say? It is traditional theory of law. Yeah, so you have to make sure that you separate the two, you differentiate the two, doctrine of law and principles in law. There are two different things. Yeah, so when you talk about characteristics of doctrinal research, you're looking only at the legal propositions, you're looking at the law itself. Yeah, whether the law works or otherwise. Again, on the other hand, we have this non-doctrinal research. It's also known as social legal research. Now, this is the type of research that nowadays legal researchers always carry out, even with me. And I think Dr. Maskun too, yeah, we are conducting the study on plastic pollution. And at the same time, we are also doing social research on how do people throw away plastic, for example. How do they manage plastic waste, for example? And you can't find those in the law, in statutes, in regulation. You can't find that information. So you need to go out and beyond and to conduct surveys, questionnaires, in order to get what people think about plastic waste management, for example. So you need to go beyond reading your materials on your laptops. You have to go beyond that. Yeah, you need to go out for that. So the empirical research is carried out by collection and gathering data or information relating to universe by first-hand study or the people and institutions supposedly regulated by law as the focus of study. So you need to go out, like I said. Yeah. So field work is usually required for this type of research. So sometimes when you have some money given for your research projects, yeah, we appoint research assistants. Now, these research assistants are actually the ones who actually do the work for us. They, you know, they go out. I think many of you would know this. They go out, they hand out their surveys and questionnaires to a certain part of the society, and they come back with the responses, the feedbacks. Yeah. People like Dr. Maskun, I think he just stays in the office and do desktop study, Dr. Maskun, yeah. And you have your PAs or your assistant researchers to do the work for you in terms of field work. Yeah, Dr. Maskun. But anyway, that's important, yeah. When you're doing something which is of a social legal study, which we do it all the time now, because remember when I said we merge the two, field work is very, very important. Now, characteristics of empirical or non-doctrinal research, meaning the social legal study that we were talking about. It tries to find out the impact of non-legal events upon the legal decision process. Because you must remember that sometimes when there's a legal effect that takes place, it may not be in the form of punishment, right? It may be in the form of preventing someone from doing the same thing again, the same offenses again. Yeah. So when a legal decision For example, in Malaysia, if somebody pollutes the air by burning, burning a section of the plantation, not only they will get either imprisonment, they will also get a fine, or it will be both. But that is a legal decision. What about the non-legal impacts of this? So it would tell other people to prevent themselves from committing offenses to burn, right? So it tries to find out the impact from a legal aspect and also from a non-legal aspect. Now, at the same time, it seeks to identify and appraise the degree of variables which influence the outcome and legal decision-making. So this one is to actually identify or to take note of the different factors that may influence the outcome and legal decision-making. Now, in Malaysia, when we talk about environmental management, we always talk about enforcement of the authority, how effective it is. Do we have enough enforcement officers? So this will actually influence the outcome. If we don't have enough enforcement officers, we have all the laws in the world, there's no point of enforcing the law in the first place, because there's nobody to enforce the law. There's nobody to implement the law, right? It cannot be effective. Now, thirdly, it tries to find out the effect of each decision on people and society as such. The impact of which? Of that decision on people. It lays different and lesser emphasis on doctrine, meaning in this kind of research, you're looking at the application of the law. You're not talking about, oh, you know, this doctrine on stare decisis is utterly important. You have to look at the precedents, judicial precedents, blah, 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 and all that. No, we're not looking at the theoretical, we're looking at the practical application of that particular law. It seeks answer to broader and more numerous questions, meaning at the end of the day, it is not only going to have an impact on the legal aspect, you're looking at more on a broader manner by which hopefully all the communities or the society take into account that particular provision. For example, not burning, do not burn, take it more seriously. So the impact is broader. It touches not only to this set of society, it goes beyond that, And finally, it may involve the use of research perspective, research design, conceptual framework skills and training, not peculiar to lay trained personnel. Yeah, people like me, you know, when I did this, I was wondering, what is this difference? What's the difference between empirical and non-empirical? What's the difference between this? What's the difference between that? Because we were not trained. We were not trained. You know, you are very lucky right now that Dr. Maskon has arranged this for you. Because during my time, we were not trained. What's the meaning of this? I would, oh, how do you do this? You know, we don't have that kind of information. We are not trained for this. But now I think it has evolved, and this research legal methodology is very important, especially for the young ones, so that when you design your project, there is some sense from A to Z. You don't need to go, some people don't have any organization. They start from the middle, and then they might just go up, and then they might just go down to Z, and they might just fly up again. So everything is, you know, all over the place. It's very chaotic. You do not want that. So you've got to make sure that you have something which is more organized with procedure, and you know exactly where you're heading. So you know from step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and finally at the end of it all, you will get what you want, the solution that you are aiming for, right? Let's move on. Okay, so research design for non-doctrinal research. Basically, this is what you will find, well, at least I will find when I supervise my students, master's and PhD students, well, at least some of it. For example, you need to have the title to your research study. You need to have that. Secondly, obviously, you need to have objectives of the study. But before you have the objectives of the study, you need to understand the problem first. That's why reading around the subject area is very, very important. And when I say read around the area, meaning not only from the aspect of law, You have to read everything else. Economics, politics of the country. You're talking about social well-being connected to the law or connected to the problem area, right? You need to talk about businesses, industries affected by whatever law that we have right now. For example, Maskum, you're talking about plastic pollution. We're talking about how the business and industries can be, extended in terms of their responsibility to be accounted for when it comes to plastic pollution or management. So you have to read around the subject. I always tell my students that you cannot read the law on its own, because there must be a social problem, or there must be some issue in the community that triggers this problem, right? So you need to read around it. Now, after you have set down the objectives of the study, you need to formulate your hypothesis. And this is very difficult. When I did my PhD thesis, oh dear, I had a tough time, right? Because reading around the area is already a lot. Yeah, it's a huge task. And finally, you've got to come up with this hypothesis, and you can only have, like a paragraph, because I remember my supervisor was telling me, Dr. Maskun, Hanim, you must make sure that when somebody asks you about your thesis, your hypothesis, you can answer it with a sentence, just one sentence, not two, just one sentence. I had a tough time. But, perseverance and keep on reading and trying to figure everything out, then finally I came up with one sentence, right? And that would be the basis of your study. You must understand that before you come up with your hypothesis, or the extended hypothesis. And then you carry on with your methodology, selection of sample, if you need to conduct sampling, your sources of data, where does it derive from, your data collection, your analysis, interpretation of data, and how do you verify your findings, and conceptualization of your actual thesis or your project paper or your dissertation. So this is basically a design, or somehow a guideline for you to look on how do you formulate. This is your first chapter. This is not your second, third, fourth, fifth chapter. This is only your first chapter, right? Your proposal, your working proposal. And then only you expand. Okay, so for example, okay, Dr. Maskun, this example of research design for non-doctrinal research. Now, I found that Indonesia, even Malaysia, you talk about climate change, right? But Malaysia, Indonesia, we don't have any climate change act. So I'm just giving you an example here. Let's say Dr. Maskun is proposing a climate change act after looking through problems of plastic pollution, and plastic pollution is one of the key drivers in the change of climate in Indonesia. So he proposed, okay, let's propose climate change act in Indonesia. So you need to come up with all of this. The title, the need of CCA in Indonesia, objectives of the study, how far CCA will be feasible in Indonesia. Probably you need to carry out a feasibility study. That takes a lot of work, yeah. Formulation of hypothesis. This is another one, like I mentioned earlier, another huge task. Methodology, selection of sample, sources of data, data collection, analysis and interpretation of data, verification of findings, conceptualization. So these would be the methods that you need to undertake in order to design only your first proposal, your first chapter. And that takes a lot of work. Yeah, because you have to sit down again, read around the materials and figure out how do you wish to go about this in order to get to a good solution. Right, now, sources of non-doctrinal research. Just now it was doctrinal research. Now we're talking about sources of non-doctrinal research. Non-doctrinal research means this is going beyond what you have right now on desktop. This is going beyond what you have with you right now, which are your statutes, your legislation, your constitution, your customary law, your adat law, and everything else. Yeah, those are the primary sources. But when you do non-doctrinal research, you will have to go through via questionnaires, interviews, observation, focus group discussion. Now, for many of you LLM students and also PhD students, I think these ones would be challenging. Yeah, because you need to design your questions around your subject area. And how do you do that? You have to really, really, really understand the problem. Okay, so these are the sources of non-doctrinal research. These are the ones. Now, the difference between non-doctrinal and doctrinal research are these. Doctrinal research, like I said earlier, we emphasize on legal principles, doctrines of law. We're using the law, right? But on the other hand, non-doctrinal does not really look at all this traditional, conventional data. We don't look at that. We are looking at more of a going out there, you know, studying things in connection with your area of interest. So that's what we're looking at. And like I said earlier, it needs special training. Now, for those young ones, young students, Dr. Maskun, I'm not young anymore, and neither are you, you know. So the special training mentally, you know, are solely for the young ones. And I think, yeah, many of you who are very young, yeah, we are not so young anymore, but we're still learning. But those young scholars with me right now, make sure you have this training. If you intend to become a lawyer, if you intend to become a prosecutor for the government, you need this, because the law does not confine to the four walls of your office. Sometimes you have to go beyond that, right? So you have to go beyond that. Right, next. This is the one that I had problem with, Dr. Maskun. Qualitative versus quantitative, my goodness. What does it all mean? Now, you know, trying to pronounce it was a little bit difficult for me. You know, it was a little bit curly, Dr. Maskun. Qualitative, quantitative, qualitative, quantitative. What does it all mean? Did I do that? I was thinking to myself. When I did my undergraduate project paper, did I do this qualitative? I don't think I did. It was back in the 1990s, 1994, I think. You know, did I do? No, I didn't do this, you know. So basically, the thing is, between qualitative and quantitative, you know, the word quantitative, the only thing I know, it has a lot to do with maths. It has a lot to do with numbers. Yeah, so that's quantitative research. And normally, legal scholars like us, we wouldn't even bother with quantitative research. Yeah, but nowadays, like I said, we have merged from being a more qualitative research towards quantitative research by conducting interviews and surveys, questionnaires, and so forth. Okay, so this would be the differences between qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative data is found in numerical form, numbers, yeah, such as statistics, percentage, etc. Now, normally people like us, Maskun, when they say, you know, lawyers are bad with numbers, I think when it comes to us, I think that's quite true, yeah, Maskun, yeah. We are very bad with numbers. So that's why I can't even figure out the meaning of quantitative in the first place. Qualitative data is found in the form of words, pictures, things, or objects. So when it comes to qualitative, you're actually analyzing the data, your texts, your material, reading materials. That's why and you're asked to observe and analyze and review and assess and all that, yeah? So the difference is that qualitative research, once you have studied, once you have read, is often used to form theories. Now, when it comes to quantitative, yeah, when you have garnered all the responses through your surveys, questionnaires, and schedules, yeah, this kind of feedbacks can be tested using where you see whether or not it conforms with the qualitative theory. Now, you need to know this by doing this. You know, my experience would be probably different from yours, but I think at the end of the day, you'll find that once the feedback or responses gained from your surveys, the numbers of it will actually translate to some kind of a statement. Interpretation of it is again very pertinent. This one, I think, Dr. Maskun, you need to help the students doing this kind of a survey designing and also really going out, not right now. You can actually use Google Form and all that. We have so many platforms, right, in order for us to send out questionnaires and surveys. So probably you might like to have a session with your students on how to, because it depends on the aspect of law that you're looking at, and you need to know the problem that you're dealing with, or else you can't design the questions effectively, So this one, again, it takes a lot of practice in terms of quantitative as compared to qualitative, which we are so used to. Okay, now once you have all that, at the same time also, it is imperative that you do some reasoning, legal reasoning, they call it, either by way of deductive or by way of inductive. Dr. Maskun, you have any idea on this, Dr. Maskun? What do you mean by deductive and inductive? See, you didn't go through legal research methodology. Same like me. So I was like, oh my God, what is this deductive and inductive? But after a while, you become to understand, because sometimes the way that you approach a problem, it could be a deductive manner or it could be an inductive manner. Whether you're looking at it from a bigger point of view and you're narrowing it down, that's how I look at things. Or you look at a very small area of the problem and you start to expand it. So it's either you're looking at it from a bigger picture and you narrow it down to a smaller area of law, or it's the other way around. Or the next one is you're looking from a very small issue in the kampung, for example, right? And after that, you expand it and you make it into a global issue, right? So this could be deductive or this could be inductive. Let's see. Okay, so deductive is from big to small. Inductive is from small to big, to put it very simply, right? Okay, so deductive method is, for example, I've given you here, deduction is the process of reasoning from general, very big, and you come up to something which is a very narrow conclusion. So an example that I've given here is all flowers have fragrance. Rose is a flower, therefore rose has fragrance, right? For example, Dr. Maskun is a man. Dr. Maskun is a man. Can you hear me? I'm giving you an example, deductive argument. Okay. For example, all men are strong. Dr. Maskun is a man. Therefore, Dr. Maskun is strong. Can you see that, Dr. Maskun?
Yes, of course, sure.
Yeah, I hope so. Okay. Okay, you get that. So basically from something which is big, a general statement, and then you narrow it down to something which is more pointed at. Okay. Unlike inductive method is a process of reasoning from a particular case, something which is small. So it's the other way around now. Yeah, something which is a narrow issue, a small issue, and then you generalize it. You make it into a big issue. So an example of inductive method, for example, I give man A died, man B died, man C died, man D died, man E died, and so on, right? So all men are mortal. Now, if we were to take the other way around, and I'll say, Dr. Maskun is a strong man. Dr. Zulfan is a strong man. And so on, doctor, so on. So finally, at the end of the day, I'll say all men are strong. Can you see that? I reversed it, right? So it could be this methods, it depends on each and every one of you. So different people have different way of discerning things, and I have my way of discerning things. I always look it from the other way around. Yeah, I'm not looking at it from the inductive method. Okay, so the differences between Inductive and deductive methods. Inductive works from more specific to generalization, from small to big. Deductive works from general, big to small, right? Conclusion is likely based on premises, and as you go on, you see that deductive is also known as a top-down approach, okay? While the inductive is known as a bottom-top. That means from the top you go up, from the bottom you go up, yeah? Right. Now, this is the most difficult part. Once we've gone through all that, you've read your materials, you've come up with your observations, you know, probably you might have done a little bit of survey here and there. Now, how to actually write a research proposal. You've got all this information. I remember when I was doing my PhD, you know, I had so many books, so many text references, reading materials. I was like trying to figure out how do I go about trying to make sure that all the information that I've received, that I've collected, can actually put down into 2 paragraphs research problem. And that was, I had a tough time as well, you know, and I began to change and change and change. But after a while, you cannot change your research problem anymore. There must be a time when you say to yourself, this is it, right? I've done all my readings, and at the end of the day, this is the problem to my research. You cannot go on for the next 1 year or 2 years, especially for PhD students, to carry on, you know, shifting the goalposts. You can't do that. So you have to make sure you know your research problem. In other words, you read, you extract information, important information when it comes to legal aspect, and you see from there. So what really is a research problem here? Okay, and then somehow in a way it will overlap with your title framing, and of course you will have to come up with a literature review. Literature review, again, it will go back to your reading of your materials that you have found prior. And finally, you'll be talking about or writing your draft proposal. And draft proposal, you know, it can change over time depending on how much you read, how many times you read the same material. Sometimes the first time you read, you don't understand. The second time you read, oh yes, I understand. Oh, so this is what the article is trying to say. Third time you read it, it's completely different. Yeah, your understanding of the same is completely different. And then you tell yourself, oh my God, you know, I completely reread this. I completely misread this article. Oh my. And yet you've done your research proposal, right? So this kind of, how do you say this, ups and downs while you're writing a proposal, it's normal, okay? Everybody goes through it, yeah? Everyone, okay? Those who get distinctions or whatever, yeah? They will go through all these ups and downs, all these emotions. So don't worry, as long as you know what you're getting at, make sure you're focused, you'll be able to write your research proposal quite well. Right, now, sources of research data, like I said again, how do you, basically, you're talking about assembling facts from reading your materials. You have to identify the legal issues. That, again, is another problem, because most of the stuff that you get may not be on legal issues. It may be on non-legal issues. Now, how do you interpret that into a legal problem? Now, you can ask Dr. Maskun that. You can go to his room and ask him how to identify the legal issues after what I've read this. And sometimes it may come from an article which is nothing to do with the law. Nothing to do with the law, right? So it's a newspaper article. Probably it's a note, commentary by a person from the NGO. But how do you make it translate into a legal issue? So this one, it takes a little bit of skills. Next one is to analyze the issues with a view to searching for the law background reading. For example, if you have a newspaper article that talks about plastic pollution in Indonesia has risen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's the title of the article in the newspaper, right? And if you were to read everything else, it doesn't talk anything about the law. It doesn't say anything about the law. and you find that there is some social problem here, right? The social problem is that because of the fact that we do a lot of takeaways and deliveries. You have Grab and you have Grab there, right, Maskun? Yes, you have. Yeah. Okay, you have
Yes.
Grab there. So in other words, we are all staying at home. Some of us don't like to cook. Some of us are lazy to cook, right? So we start pressing Grab, dang, 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 Grab. Okay, let's go for example, KFC. Right. Okay, fine. So they come to our house, send you the KFC's chicken, right? Regular, original, or spicy, and then probably in a plastic package. And because of that, there has been a lot of plastic waste. That was actually being portrayed in that article in the newspaper. And nothing else. They just say, oh, there's been an increase in, plastic pollution, plastic waste because of this and this, and because a lot of deliveries and takeaways and all that. Nothing else. So how do you interpret that to become a legal problem, a legal issue? So that is another key where that's a hint where you need to go for your background search, background study. Let's look at the problem of waste in general, right? In general. Then after which, okay, this is what we have, the waste has come from different sources, and due to that, we have this increase of plastic pollution in marine waters from domestic sources, and see whether or not we have any legislation in order to curb prevention of plastic pollution. So that therefore, you're using the article in the newspaper as a trigger point for you to read up on the laws of waste pollution, for example. Then you narrow it down to plastic pollution. See, you get the idea? So using you're using the inductive method, or what's the other method, Dr. Maskun? Inductive method, what's the other method, Dr. Maskun?
Deductive method.
Yes. Deductive method, exactly. Right. You're listening, thank you. So you're using that, right? So that gives you some kind of an idea on where to search, what to search, how to search. Probably in legal dictionaries, what's the meaning of waste? Now, in different parts of the different parts of the world, waste can mean many things. Indonesia may be different from ours. In Malaysia, Malaysia could have a different meaning of waste as compared to, let's say, the United Kingdom or United States. So you have to look into all this. Yeah. In other words, not only dictionaries, you have to go beyond that. Look into legislations, textbooks written by scholars. You have to look at law reforms. For example, in Korea, you have to look at policy papers, journal articles and all that. And you have to locate primary source, your legislation, your local legislation and your case laws. Now, at the end of the day, once you have that, you synthesize all the issue, meaning you have to make sure that you know, oh yeah, oh, this is the problem, you have the background, and this is the present legislation when it comes to plastic pollution in Indonesia. Then you're doing a little bit of comparative laws with other countries, and then you come to this problem where you say, in Indonesia, waste management, especially in regards to plastic pollution, doesn't exist, for example. Legislation does not exist to curb plastic pollution in Indonesia, for example. Yeah. And then you come to a tentative conclusion. So this could be your conclusion. So therefore, you need reforms, you need new legislations, or even if you have lack of legislation, provisions in the existing legislation, you come to a reform. You suggest probably we need new legislation or new provisions in the existing legislation that we have. Okay, so the types of data research, again, we talk about primary data and also secondary data. This is very important because when it comes to writing up your PhD proposal or your LLM, if you're doing full dissertation, You will need to inform your readers, especially your examiners, how did you collect or what are the information that you're collecting from. So this is very, very important. Yeah. You have to tell them, oh, I've collected this information from this and this and this, from this statutes, and all that. Primary data consisting of legislation, etc., etc. Secondary data is actually from surveys, questionnaires, and all that. So that's very important, so that your examiners would know, oh, she did this, or she did this research, or by reading all this or collecting all this from these sources. Next. Now, once you have done your collecting your primary data, there are advantages of collecting them, and there are also disadvantages of collecting primary data, and that's why you need the support from secondary data, right? So basically, primary data, they are original and relevant. Yeah, sometimes you can't even find them, you know, for that particular law that you are researching on. There won't be there won't be enough data, insufficient data that you can find in Indonesia. So this can be supported with secondary data. Yeah. When it comes to this type of primary data, obviously it's reliable because it comes from the mouth of the horse, right? It comes from the source, the origin of the designer of that particular data. Yeah, you're not getting it from anywhere else. You're getting it from that person, yeah, or that institution, or that organization, or that government agency. So it's very reliable. Now, there are also disadvantages, like I mentioned earlier. Okay, primary data can also be collected through interviews, yeah. But this is the thing. When you wish to collect something on the social impact of legislation that you have in Indonesia in connection with open burning, right? Now, if you wish to do the interview or questionnaire or data collection by using surveys, it's rather impossible, I would say. Wouldn't it, Dr. Maskum? Because you have your Indonesia is, you know, it's an island. There are islands in Indonesia. In order to actually give, you know, interviews and all that, to get interviews from people, yeah, you need a lot of time, and there will be a wider coverage, and that's difficult, I think, you know. So that's why more often than not, we are quite selective in terms of looking for people for that particular interview. Very focused, very targeted, you know. So yeah, so in other words, we won't have, first is time, cost, time, money, and the section of the community that you wish to interview. So it could be a problem in that sense, yeah. And this is number 4 is the problem that many of us experience, where the respondents, the person that we give the questionnaires or surveys to, they do not give timely responses. We ask them, Bapak Shahiruddin Latif, I give you this interview question, Shahiruddin, and I expect it back in 1 week's time. Ya, maknanya next Friday I expect to get it back. Tetapi tengok next Friday, Shahiruddin tak terima, bukan tak terima, dia terima tapi dia tak jawab. You didn't even respond to my survey, for example, right? So this is one of the problems that we get. And sometimes it's a headache because we can't keep on waiting. So that's why when you have like 100 respondents, perhaps it's best to have 150 respondents to be on the safe side. Because there could be certain sections, or probably you give about 20% that may not even reply to your survey or questionnaire. So this could be one of the disadvantages. Now, advantages of secondary data. This is very easy, yeah? Very cheap, especially now. Yeah, we have the access to internet. Very, very easy. We click on something and we can get the journal. Sometimes it's for free, right? If your university subscribes to Elsevier, for example, you just put in your username and then your password, and there you go. Voila. All the articles that you want to look for, they're all there. So it saves a lot of time, effort, and money to actually do this kind of research. Yeah. So I didn't have that, Dr. Maskun, during my time in the 1990s, So that's why we had to cut out newspaper clippings. So sad, it was so sad during those days, But now so sad, But now I think with the internet connection, with the technology, I think many of you can come up with a first class thesis. Many of you can come up with first class thesis. Not a problem at all. But you have to make sure that you frame your proposal, very well. Then you can, not only you can save time, you might just even finish your PhD in less than 3 years. I can guarantee you, you concentrate and focus fully. Okay, now there are also disadvantages of secondary data. Yeah, the data collected by the third party may not be reliable. This is also a problem. Yeah, data can become very old. Right now in University Kebangsaan Malaysia, we expect that our citation in any article should be the most 5 years old. Anything beyond 5 years old, even if it's relevant, they discourage you. And it's very difficult to find, the same data on the same kind of study. It could be a 2002 study. And after that, there's no other studies in connection with the same issue. So at the end of it all, you might have to use those data, even though it becomes old. So it depends, yeah? Special care is required to amend or modify for use of data. Yeah, this is, again, usually you don't even do this, yeah? Secondary data can also raise the issue of authenticity, originality, and copyright. Yes, because most of us, you know what we do nowadays? I think the young ones, I think the old ones too, like us, Dr. Maskun, we sometimes take from position papers or reports, yeah? Cut, copy, paste. Again, everybody does that these days. Cut, copy, paste without even citing the source. Be careful. Once you cite, pick out something from anywhere, make sure you do your citation. Make sure you write down the source of this. If not, it's considered as plagiarism. Remember that, okay? That will jeopardize your whole thesis. So make sure you do that. Okay, so collection of data, I think I'm not going to go through this, what's the meaning of it, importance of data collection. I think you already know. But more importantly is that I've marked it in red, yeah, where it says that the goal for all data is to capture quality evidence, yeah, and this is essential to maintain the integrity of research. So with that collection of data, it tells people that, hey, look, I've done something which is original, it is accurate, it is focused, it is relevant to the study that I'm taking now. So you must pose it to them, impress upon them that this is a research which is worth the collection of data. So you must make sure that integrity is not jeopardized or is not undermined by anything else. Okay, be careful. So honesty, authenticity must come into play when you're collecting data. When it's not yours, don't say it's yours. When it's yours, you say it's yours. Okay, and cite the source of data. Yeah. Okay, consequences from improperly collected data include inability to answer research questions accurately. This is the problem. So in other words, when you are designing for a data collection exercise, you must make sure that at the end of the day, it answers the research questions. It answers the problem statement somehow. Okay, you must have that in mind. And sometimes you have to validate a certain study that was taken prior to your study. Now, perhaps sometimes when you take it, when you do your study in a wrong manner, it may not be able to do just that. So you must make sure that whatever data that you collect, it will validate your study and nothing else, yeah? If you don't do that, obviously you'll be wasting a lot of time, money, yeah? And at the end of it all, you will not get the results that you wish to get. So make sure that you have to design your research in terms of collection of data very carefully. Right, now, I think I've gone through this. Sources of collection of data, it's a repetition thereof, yeah. Primary sources, primary authority, looking at the judiciary. So in Malaysia, we look at articles published in Malayan Law Journal or Current Law Journal that we have now in Malaysia. And again, this question on scopus. Dr. Maskun, do you have or do you do you make it mandatory for your PhD students to publish? Dr. Maskun? Oh, he's not here, is he? Tak ada ya? They lost ya? Okay, never mind. I'll come back to that later, yeah? Okay, as we move on, then we're looking at the primary field when we talk about the legislation and so forth, like the Indian constitution, in this case, Indonesian constitution and so forth. And then we're looking at the executive decisions by ministries, you know, the local municipalities, local councils and so forth. And also the primary field sources would include questionnaire, interview, observations, because you're doing it on your own. So it becomes a primary field of data collection. So when it comes to this type of methods where you need to collect data, like I mentioned earlier, it could come in the form of questionnaires. You can have interviews. Yeah, you can have observation. Yeah, by sitting down there and looking at people whether they're throwing things or not in the rubbish bin. If you're doing anything on waste, you can go by telephone, mobile. I don't know whether you still use fax, but now more often than not, you use email as your mode of communication. And you have to schedule all this, yeah, because it is very important that in order to get all the feedbacks from the primary field sources, you need to make sure that you need to have your timeline, because you cannot be doing writing your let's say your third chapter, which is really on the impact of legislation without doing all the questionnaires or interviews that you wish to undertake. You can't do that. So you need to do this as preliminary tasks first before you can carry on with your second or third or fourth. Do all this first. Do all this first. Do not wait until you're doing a third or your fourth chapter, or at the end of your thesis, you're only conducting all this. Do this as quickly as you can. Okay, so questionnaires is the well, if you I'm not sure whether any of you have formed a questionnaire, yeah, but basically it must contain questions related to your research work. And it must be filled by the respondent himself. You cannot pula, you have a questionnaire and you ask your family member to do it and you start filling it for them. Never mind, kita tipu sajalah kan, this one, never mind. No, you can't do that, okay? You must make sure it is impartial. Yeah, impartial meaning you've got to send it out to other individuals, independent individuals, okay? So that you can come back with impartial responses, which is very important to your research study. Okay, a questionnaire is a series of questions asked to individuals to obtain statistically useful information about a given topic. So in this sense, you've got to design the questions properly, like I said earlier, right? Where you can actually hand it out to specific groups that you have already targeted, or kalau entire population, that will be very, very, very difficult. It's like going through a census of some kind, which is completely difficult. So do not go there. So you make sure that you have targeted groups, focus groups, then you send it out to them. If you're talking about business that deals a lot with plastic pollution, you go to the manufacturers, you go to the retailers, for example. You go to the shops that give out plastic, for example. Go to the malls. So you have targeted groups already in mind, yeah? Make sure that you avoid all these inappropriate questions, incorrect ordering of questions, incorrect scaling or bad questionnaire. This one, I think everyone has to go through this. How do you design those questions? There are some kind of, if you were to Google it up, because that's what I normally do right now, these days, there are certain platforms that allows you to, or assist you in formulating questions. Okay, there are, but this one again, it doesn't give you like a complete help or assistance. It doesn't write down for you. It doesn't. It gives you on how to make it more of a positive questions, because when you design a question, it has to give some kind of a positive impact on the respondents, not something which indicates, you know, something which is negative. On the other hand, sometimes when you give negative questions, people might not even want to answer. So you've got to put it in a correct way. The sentences must be correct. The what do you call this? The message that you wish to go across is correct, or else they won't even bother to answer your questions. So you have to be very careful with that. Okay, interviews again, you know, this again depends on you. If you wish to undergo this kind of collecting data via interview, make sure that the person that you're dealing with is somebody who is who has knowledge on this particular issue. Yeah, sometimes too we are pressed for time, so we just get anybody that we can, and that person may not even give you a complete answer or any answer for that matter. So you've got to make sure that you, on your part, you have to make sure you have all those questions 1 to 10, for example. Yeah, and don't make it a long-winded question. People do not like that. Yeah, it's either a yes or a no, or something that, you know, you give them some kind of choices, for example, or something which when they answer you back, you know, it's nothing that strains the mind. Because I tell you, the interviewees would not like to answer you unless that person likes to talk. But more often than not, you know, they just like to ask you, okay, what are the questions? Sometimes interviews are like that. Okay, what are the questions? Can you give it to me first? And I will, you know, prepare for you, and then we can have a chat on the phone, for example. Sometimes it happens like that. Sometimes it could even be an email interview. You send me the questions, I will answer for you in writing. It could be like that. So it depends on the interviewer and also the interviewee. Now, observation, usually, you know, when it comes to the legal research, yeah, we actually put ourselves in that position, yeah, for observation to see whether or not, you know, that particular issue or that particular problem is an issue after all. So you actually put yourself in that position. Yeah, for example, let's say you wish to see whether or not people in the park throw, or people at the beach throw away plastic products, or, you know, plastics. Yeah, so you just sit down there, you know, eating ice cream or something, and you just start observing, looking around, looking at people and see, oh, you know, there's a bin right there. There are a few bins here at the beach, and you start observing. But you must already know what are the questions that you need to fill. What are the observation points that you need to fulfill? You need to have that. How many people are throwing plastic in the garbage bin? How many people are actually throwing plastic in the sea? How, you know, what kind of materials that are thrown in the sea? What kind of materials, plastic materials, are thrown in the garbage bin, and all that lah. So you've got to have a specific kind of questions that you have prepared. Okay, so telephone, mobile, fax, and mail. I think I don't need to go through this, yeah, for the collection of responses. Okay, this one again, the same thing, you know, but what I do nowadays, I don't send by emails anymore. I send by Google Forms. In other words, you need to get all the email addresses, if you can find, right? If you can get, and then you start sending it out. If you can't, then perhaps another method would be best. And you can do like a combination, yeah, for questionnaire interview, depending on the conclusion that you wish to get at the end of the collection of data. Right, now case study method, I think everybody does this, yeah. You look at a particular case study, either you read it or basically what we do in UKM is when you talk about case study, either you take a particular case from a case book and we start researching it, yeah, finding a problem and looking at the law that has been applied, looking at the lacking of the laws, legislation, the impact of the laws, compliance of the laws right until the end, yeah. You can also actually look at real case studies, you know, for example, let's say, case studies, for example, you go to a prison, right? You want to see how effective the, there's nothing to do with the law, but it has to do with the liberties of the prisoners, yeah? You might just wish to go and see whether or not the prisoners are accorded with their liberties, whatever liberties that they have, yeah? Whether that has been fully complied with by the prison authorities, for example. So you go there. You go there, you experience it yourself. So that is another way of actually gaining some kind of collection of data through case study, yeah? Survey method, I think this one, I think everybody knows how to collect survey, I hope. Yeah, this is more on a quantitative information. And again, this will take a lot of time, effort and money, but the data collected is of high accuracy, current and relevant to the topic. So this is, again, it needs to be a structured kind of a survey, and it needs to have a lot of people, yeah. To do it alone is it can be quite difficult, yeah. It's quite challenging, but if you're persistent enough, you might just be able to carry out this kind of a survey method. But this, usually when you talk about survey method, it will take a lot of time, yeah, for this. You need to get the samples and the sampling, and you need to make sure that you again design your questions relevant to your topic. Okay, secondary sources of data collection. The other authorities which are not acting in law, making capacity, are secondary authorities, like non-government organizations. Again, at the moment, I'm working with an NGO at the moment, and it's actually through them that I have some kind of feedbacks, because they are the ones who actually work with the communities when it comes, because I'm doing on plastic, yeah. So they are the ones who have this close connection with the community, right? Normally NGOs are like that. So when I work with them, I actually ask them to find out comments or feedbacks or responses from the society, yeah, whoever that they're working with, whether you know, they're close with, on the certain types of issue. Asking them, hey, you know, is this law effective? You know, what do you think about this problem on plastic pollution that we have right now? Something like that. I mean, it's going to be much more focused, but you need to talk to people like this as well. I've also spoken to, or getting feedbacks from governmental agencies, and that's equally important, especially when you want to talk about comparative studies between Indonesia and Malaysia, and how do you go about by doing this, and probably the government officers would have some inside knowledge, yeah, to speak on those issues that you're asking him or her. So that's important as well. Now, example of a basic research content, right? This is again something which is somehow it's how do you say, it overlaps, yeah, with the research methodology content which I gave you earlier. So you need your introduction, literature review is utterly important, your research and findings, analysis of finding, recommendations, conclusions. So this is a very basic one, very basic. So when you do your position study, a short commentary or a research project, you know, you just go on to this. Use this as a guideline. Use this as a guideline, which is good enough. And after which you expand, okay? But make this as a guideline. Okay, so that's it, yeah, for now. But I wish to share with you something else. Just a sample on, hang on, yeah. Just a sample on what I've been doing. This is the one. Okay. Right. Now, this is a sample, okay, on recycling practices in Malaysia with a focus on plastic, of course, right? So, hang on. So, introduction, background. So, this is only a sample. There's so many other ways of coming up with, your chapterization and all that. But you can actually use this as kind of a guideline as well. So introduction, background, and then objective of position paper. If this is doing a position paper, yeah. Outline of the paper, what is to come, yeah, basically the content of this position paper. And then literature review. Okay, what you have, oh, sorry, hang on. Okay. Basically literature review, again, global studies, literature reviews. That means I'm looking from what kind of method? I'm looking at inductive, or I'm looking at deductive. So if you look here, I'm looking more from the deductive point of view, which is from big to small. I'm looking from the global studies. I'm reading from the global studies point of view, and then good recycling practices in some countries. So I pick a certain countries for comparative laws, right, practices. And then I go down to Malaysia, right? And what is my conclusion on my literature, what I have read. So basically, in your conclusion or your literature review, you would have already come up with some kind of a research problem, because you've already read a lot. You've already read from the global point of view, regional, bilateral, and finally in your own country. So you would have already come up with some kind of an idea on what the problem is. Yeah. So in other words, your statement of problem should not be an issue now. And then after which, your research and findings. How do you design? What is your method of research? If you wish to do surveys and questionnaires, what is demographic profile survey respondents? Are they above 25 years old? Are they only men? Are they only elderly people? Are they only Malays? Are they only, foreign people? Are they only from Makassar, or are they only from Jakarta, or it doesn't matter, all Indonesians or Malaysians, for example, right? Now, next part is your findings from surveys and findings from interviews. What is it that you have found from your legal research methodology that you've undertook in 3.2 and 3.1, right? Now, next you carry on with analysis of findings. So you're using this chapter 3 and chapter 2 in order to come up with your chapter 4. So you would have this as your primary, and you have this as well, primary and also secondary here in the second chapter. But the third chapter, because you're doing it on your own, it's original, it's considered as primary data. You're doing it yourself, right? So from chapter 2 and chapter 3, you're doing your analysis. So from those chapter 2 and chapter 3, I can write something that says, there is a high plastic use in Malaysia. That is one of my conclusions. There is a lack of awareness among consumers. Probably from here, probably from here. Yeah, but lack of awareness among consumers could derive from here. Now, recycling efforts are concentrated upstream. Now, recycling efforts, it could come from here and it could come from here. Plastic waste landscape in Malaysia, right? Limited market for recycled products. It may come from here, the questions that you have designed, and also it could be here. All the materials that you have read. But in particular, when I talk about Malaysia, then, if I talk about Malaysia, then it will be only in regards to Malaysia. If not, I'll be talking on the whole. And finally, after you have come up with this, these are your problems, isn't it? There's high plastic use in Malaysia. There's lack of awareness. Oh my God, there's lack of awareness. You know, rescuing efforts are only concentrated upstream, but not downstream, meaning, you know, when it comes to the consumers just end up throwing things away and that's it. Don't do anything about it anymore. Limited market for recycled products. We don't even have enough legislations on recycling. What more, when we talk about recycling of products, we don't have that either. And then once you have come up with the analysis of those, then you answer those problems, these problems. Yeah, you answer these problems really with the recommendations here. How do we solve the problems mentioned in, hang on here. How do we solve the problems as analyzed in chapter 4? I have reiterated here in chapter 5. So I could use mechanisms such as raising awareness through effective campaigns, for example. I can use this recommendation of recycling bins in Malaysia. I can come up with this recommendation on concerted effort by all stakeholders, meaning not only consumers, but business industries, by NGOs, governmental agencies, to reduce plastic and to improve recycling practices in Malaysia. And then finally, this is the most important part when it comes to legal study. How do you make reforms? How do you make your suggestions in order to improve the legislation and policy measures in Indonesia? So this is 5.4 to me, apart from all this, because these are social practices, right? How do you translate these social practices into legislation? How do you make it mandatory? How do you make sure that all these are being complied with by the business industries, by the society? How do we do it? So we need some kind of governance, rules. So we place it in legislation and policies. And finally will be your conclusion. Okay, so this is only one of the samples. Yeah, there's so many others. Yeah, PhDs would be like, you know, they have like chapter 1 to chapter 7, I think, and you know, within those chapters, it'll be like so many subheadings and, you know, separate headings, and that will be immense. Yeah. I don't know about you, but I think I'm sure PhD thesis would be anything between 280 to 320 pages thereabouts, I think. I'm not sure, because mine was somewhere along those lines. Yeah, but in general, yeah, it would be around chapter, they would have around chapter 6, chapter 7 in total, and also the pages would be around 300 in general on average. Yeah. Okay, another one that I wish to share with you is, let me see. Where is it? This is the one. Okay. Sample of a survey questionnaire. How do you design your survey questionnaire? Now, again, it would depend on the issue that you are wishing to get some answers for. Basically, normally, you know, some of the samples would look something like this. You know, it depends again, yeah. Gender, whether you're female, your age, your number of people in your household. This one, I'm actually looking at evaluating patterns of plastics in Malaysia. So I've designed it as such, yeah. So the questions are as such: highest educational qualification, to see whether or not, this one is important to see whether or not they learned anything, or somehow suggesting that they learn anything of value when it comes to environmental waste in primary and foundation degree, whether or not they understand this meaning of, you know, waste management and all that. Occupational status, type of housing, how many times you shop at the supermarket per month, you know, you look at the plastic usage for each household to see the frequency of it, how many plastic bags you take from the supermarket per shopping trip. All these questions are, that have been designed plastic products, items you purchase per week, how many PET bottles you use per week, you know. Please rank which action you are likely to take after using PP items, whether you dispose in garbage bin, reuse item, you know, sometimes we buy stuff and then we reuse them, like bottles, yeah, plastic bottles, or we recycle them, yeah. So I'm looking at trying to get some findings to make sure that, you know, such findings can be used for policies and legislations, basically for the policymakers and so forth. And again, I'm looking at the objective of whether or not all these actually influence the domestic plastic consumption. So I'm looking at the pattern of it, yeah. So please rank which action you're likely to take immediately after bringing plastic bags home from the supermarket, you know, and all this. Are you aware of the nearest recycled bin, if there is at all? You know, in Malaysia, there are only few states that actually have this recycling practices. But even then, you know, whether or not it's been fully implemented is another thing, or fully enforced. And then please rank the options on what you would like to find out about plastic waste recycling. There was one time where I did a research study in UKM itself with my students. And my students actually came up with another set of questionnaires asking students and also officers to see whether or not they are aware of plastic waste recycling. We've done that as well. So the targeted focus group is quite narrowed down, yeah, looking at UKM and students and its staff, etc. Oh, okay, anyway. So basically, these are, you know, one of the samples that we can use. But you have to make sure that you know what the issues are, what you're trying to get at when you come up with this survey and questionnaire, whether or not it responds to the questions or the statement of problems that you've already figured out during your study. Or else even if you write all this and suddenly at the end of the day, oh no, you know, I've missed, or oh no, it doesn't answer the question. Oh, I should have figured out. That means you have not read enough. That means you're not focused on the statement of problem, right? You have not looked at it very carefully. So in general, make sure that when you're designing a research proposal or you're writing your PhD thesis, LLM thesis, make sure that you have some kind of organization. And I hope that from this presentation, you might be able to figure out already on how to go about writing your legal research, legal thesis. Okay, sometimes it may have a little bit of you know, ups and downs, you know, some glitches here and there, but don't give up. Don't give up. Make sure that you stick to your plan. Make sure it has A, B, C, D until Z, whatever, right? Stick to it, right? And sometimes, you know, your, like I said, like I mentioned earlier, your hypothesis and your objectives may change once in a while, but don't change it too much. After 6 months, or to me, after 3 months into your study for PhD thesis, or 3 to 6 months, you would already know. Statement of problem should be fixed already during that time. You should not be going here and there and everywhere, because at the end of the day, you cannot solve every question on earth. You make sure it is targeted, narrowed down, focused, concentrated, and you deal with it, right? So thank you. That's all for my presentation. Thank you everybody for listening to my, I think 1 hour and 45 minutes of my time. I think it's of your time, not my time, of your time. Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you have received or gained a little bit of insights on how to conduct your legal research. And I hope that somehow or rather you'll be using this as part of your research design. Yeah, but I'm sure there are so many other, how do you say, other data that you can take from in order to, you know, construct your research proposal or research thesis. Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Maskun.
Thank you, Hanim.
Thank you.
Do you still have enough time, Hanim, for 5 to 10 minutes, please?
Yeah, okay.
All right, one or two questions.
Sure. Not a problem. Are there any
Okay.
questions?
Ya, is there any question? Ada pertanyaan, Bapak Ibu, silakan.
Saya izin Pak Mas.
Saja juga nggak apa-apa ya. Bisa bahasa Indonesia, nanti saya translasi kalau misalnya ada. I let them to speak Indonesia, Hanim.
Sure, not a problem.
In English. Okay.
Tidak ada masalah, boleh saja.
Saya
Silakan, Bu.
izin Pak Mas Kun.
Ibu dulu ya.
I'll switch.
Ibu ya. Ibu, siapa? Ibu. Ya, Ibu Hijriani, silakan. Silakan, Bu.
Ya. Terima kasih Pak Dr. Maskun. Thank you, Hanim. Maybe I can mix in bahasa. It's okay, right?
Okay.
Okay. First question I wanna asking about. Is there a difference in research, especially the doctor dissertation between Indonesia and Malaysia, such as the characteristic of being initiated by research in Malaysia? I mean, different research between Indonesia and Malaysia about doctor's dissertation, Ms. Hanim. And can I get your material, please? Because this is because this related to our apa namanya materials, doctor.
Boleh, Bu. Okay, when it comes to your first question, thank you so much for the question, Ibu. Okay, when it comes to the differentiation between researchers in Malaysia and how you conduct in Indonesia, I don't think there's any difference. I think there shouldn't be any differences because we are actually looking for problems. We are identifying problems, trying to figure out those problems, but more or less, generally, Ibu Hijriani, we are actually trying to find out the problem, trying to find out what we can do to overcome those problems, try to fill in the gaps, the loopholes, the weaknesses, yeah? But there's no difference. We actually, but some of the right now, the researchers are more going towards social legal study. I'm not so sure in Indonesia. I think Indonesia is the same as well. But dulu ya Ibu, ya. Dulunya is more towards pure legal research. Right now,
Yes.
I'm talking about my interest, yeah, my area of interest, yeah, my area of expertise, which is environmental law. I cannot separate the two. When you talk about social problems, you talk about environmental problems. Dulunya, dia selalu discuss on pure doctrines of law. We don't do that anymore. That's very conventional, very traditional. It's not in trend anymore because those concepts have already been fixed somehow. Yeah. Yang keduanya, I hope that answer your questions. Yang keduanya is, of course, you can have this. You need this, ke, Ibu Hijriani? My slides? Yeah. You need this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Boleh. Okay. Thank you. I hope it helps you. Yeah. And I will forward it to Dr. Maskun. And
Okay.
forward it to everybody else. Yes.
Just to make clear what Ibu Hijriani said, that basically in some example, for example, in some dissertation, they put it result, funding and discussion in one chapter. Is it possible to do it?
Result and finding.
They do not separate it in like slide it.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
finding and discussion.
Understand. Now, like I said, there is only one sample. Tidak ada fixed method on how to draw out your table of contents. Some studies that I find, they have both findings and the results. As long as you have all this in your dissertation, it doesn't matter where it appears, right? Of course, it has to be like organization. What I'll do is, Dr. Maskun, I'll give you, and I'll please forward this to Ibu Hijriani. If you like, Ibu, I give you the front page of my thesis, my PhD thesis.
Thank you.
Because ada sebabnya Ibu, yang lain ada yang caranya lain. Sayanya cara saya lain. Yeah. Tapi it doesn't mean that it should steer away from the aims of your research. It must have statement of problem kena ada. hypothesis kena ada, methodology kena ada, yeah, and your findings and recommendations to your results lah, recommendations, those are important. So basically you're looking at your, what is your problem, ibu di sana, right? Then you're reading around it and you say, oh, okay, in other words, I've got to do some survey or questionnaire in order to get more information on this. That's your method. Kemudiannya, once you have developed that data collection, you derive it and interpret it and look from, betul ke masalah ini? Is this the real problem? Or there's some other problems? How does it relate to legal problem, legal jurisprudence or the laws? And then from there, you work on towards your recommendations and results. Okay, Ibu, don't worry, you'll be okay. Are you doing your PhD thesis?
Yes, indeed.
You doing your PhD thesis?
Yes, I'm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Where are you now? Chapter berapa ya, Ibu?
Oh my God.
Bab berapa, Bu? Bab berapa maksud?
Berapa, Bu?
Not
Sudah
yet.
habis ya di penghujungnya ya?
Not yet.
InsyaAllah, you should be alright. You should be alright. Yeah. Focus. Boleh buat, boleh. Yeah. Thank you, Ibu. Yes.
One more question, please.
Sure. Yeah.
One more.
Yeah.
Is there any question?
Rizky
Minta.
tadi.
Excuse me, sir.
You're in San Francisco, Rizky.
Just my background. Prof.
Yeah, yes. Don't we wish we are there? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much to Dr. Maskun and especially to the Honorable Prof. Hanim.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the brief explanation. After hearing your explanation, I felt like I starting to comprehend a little bit about research method. I'm actually a PhD program in University Hasanuddin, but I'm not start my dissertation yet. So, I'm still trying to do the literature review. So I have many questions, but just two in these opportunities. First, I would like to ask your opinion about, is it possible to use two different methods at once? I mean, for example, by using non-doctrinal and doctrinal, or qualitative and quantitative analysis in the single research. I mean, if one kind of method could give us certain knowledge about the problems, why don't we use both of the type of method? And second question is, what do you think about the recent legal research method that was developed by, for example, critical legal studies or feminist legal studies? I assume that they're trying to combine the two kind of method in legal research and make a whole new approach in legal research. So what do you think about it? And please correct me if I mistaken. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rizky. Okay, there are two questions. The first one, okay, it doesn't say anywhere that you need to just follow a method. It doesn't. Okay, like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to social legal study, which nowadays, you know, many of the legal scholars are actually going towards that now. We are using different methods. We are using pure legal study, and we're also using, like I said just now, going beyond your pure legal studies. You're doing a surveys, questionnaires. Usually during those times, you know, in 1970s, like I mentioned earlier, we hardly do this, right? You hardly do this, going out and spending time and looking surveys. Usually these are all for the social studies researchers, not for us. But nowadays, when it comes, especially when it comes to anything to do with social well-being, anything to do with social welfare, right? For the benefit of the society, of communities, of population in anywhere, we have to take into account the impact of the legislation on those people. And that's where all these mechanisms, you know, non-doctrinal mechanisms would take place. So when you say social legal study, you're doing both, merging of both aspects, social and legal, because we can't help that. They're both intertwined, isn't it? Unless you're talking about, you know, the notion of ratio decidendi in judiciary decisions, in precedents, then it's a different story. But we are looking at, for example, social legal studies, we are using both methods. Sometimes using one method is not, somehow, you know, you want something which is more you know, more, how do you say, more relevant and more, how do you say, at present, you know, it's at present. It is right now. It's happening right now. We need that information. It's happening right now. And that's why we go out for the surveys and questionnaires, because it's happening right now. We need that. So that's important. Second one is, mind you, this is the first time I've come across when you said feminist legal study. I didn't know that legal study has genders to begin with, has a male and female side to it. You know, I wouldn't know. If you can enlighten us on this, because I'm also learning. I wouldn't know this. You know, I'm quite traditional in that sense. I don't like the word feminist legal study to begin with. You know, it looks as though that, you know, it's a different. It looks as though the feminist is so like controlled, focused. I do not know. I may be wrong. Yeah, very controlled. I don't know. Perhaps Rizky, you can enlighten me on this. On what is this feminist legal? I think I've got to find out about this, Dr. Maskun. Yeah, something new, Dr. Maskun. Yeah, feminist legal study. I cannot comment on this. Yeah, I'm so sorry, because I do not even know that there is a gender when it comes to legal study. And the other one is critical study. I think this is a lot to do with the pure legal study. When you want to be, I think in every kind of study, it does not just relate to any study that we do, any research that we do. There must be some critical study of, or rather a perception on the laws that have been put in place. There must be some kind of critical analysis on what we're looking at. If it's just, you know, because there have been some researchers, you know, they just talk on the surface. They don't talk beyond that. Yeah. When you talk about critical analysis of a certain study, you've got to talk from every aspect of it. When it comes to legislation, what do you mean by this? Is it good enough? This word in itself, is this, you know, is it the interpretation that the parliament wants, for example, in Malaysia? Is this what it's supposed to be interpreted? So you have to go, when you talk about critical, every single thing you have got to analyze, and that takes a lot of work. And usually this type of critical study, you're actually looking at doctrines of law or principles of law. When you talk about, when you go doing social legal studies, you're not looking at it critically from doctrines of law. You're looking more so from the impacts of those laws on communities, right? So you have to differentiate between what you mean, but everything you have to be critical. There is no one research where you're not supposed to be critical, you know. But again, Rizky, thank you so much for your questions, and I hope that I get something from you. Enlighten us, Dr. Maskun, and perhaps his friends here. What do you mean by feminist legal study? Okay, Rizky. I will research on this. Thank you so much. I will research on this. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Bapak Ibu, saya kira cukup ya, karena Prof Hanim juga ada acara keluarga, beliau lagi kedukaan. Our deep condolences, Hanim, for what happened with you and your family.
Thank you. Yes. I've got to rush to the mosque. You know, my husband is already there. Yeah, but don't worry.
On behalf of the Faculty of Law, the Dean, and all the lecturers, and then all the participants today, would like to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Same.
And as the Hijriani said, that's your PPT presentation, please.
Oh yeah, sure. I will give it to you. Yeah, I will. And I will also forward you the presentation for the plenary session, my dear. Yeah, soon.
And also, yeah. I will prepare for the postgraduate program, right? Okay, on 18 November.
Oh yes, right.
Program. Yes,
yeah. Thank you.
I will. Okay.
At 2:00 in the afternoon. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Maskun. Thank you, my dears. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Take care.